Hello and welcome to the Balanced Singer podcast. My name is Kyle Ferrill and I'm your host. Today we are going to get into the sort of junction of two of the big strains of my life. First is singing and teaching singing, and second is Buddhism. I've been a practicing Buddhist for going on 20 years now, and first got exposed to it in college and have just increasingly seen the value of it throughout my life. And one of the core tenets of Buddhism is what's called right view. A way of thinking of right view is to see things as they actually are. Sometimes people misconstrue that Buddhism is all about everything is suffering, everything in life is suffering, but that's not true. The Buddhist framework holds that life contains suffering, and the thought of that is a corrective to a mindset of it would be great if everything was perfect all the time. Everything is, of course, not perfect all the time in life. And so the idea of the whole structure of Buddhism is surrounding how do we deal with things when they go wrong? And how do we see things as they are to mitigate suffering? So in singing, we have a number of different times when we experience something that we find unpleasant or imperfect. And what I want to talk about is how a lot of those things are examples of times when we see things as they are not, or we struggle to see things as they truly are. The first one I wanted to talk about was the idea of things that are problems in your singing. No one is going to get better at singing if they don't address their weaknesses, if they don't address, let's say, areas for improvement. I think it's really crucial for every singer to take stock of the things that they do really well and the things that they need to work on, and to see them as impartially as possible. Phyllis Curtin used to talk about singing in the mirror and acting as if the person you're seeing in the mirror is a third party. It's not you, and don't take it personally, but try to see what you actually see. I think she's after the exact same thing I'm talking about here. When I have a new student come into my studio, I routinely ask them, okay, what are some things that you want to get better at? What are some things that you think are weaknesses in your singing practice? And every single singer on the planet can rattle off a laundry list of things that they want to get better at. I then follow that up with, what are things that you're really, really good at? And virtually every singer clams up at the thought of complimenting themselves. And I always think, isn't that sad? I wish that we could all, and maybe we can, I have hope that we can reframe to the point where we can, without excess egotism, without excess pride, we can look at our singing and say, here's what I do well, A, B, C. Here's what I don't do so well, A, B, C. And we can look at the things that we do well without excess pride and egotism, and we can look at the things that we don't do so well without excess shame or self-loathing. Only then can we really, truly progress. I am very sticky with my students about their self-talk around these concepts. Because if somebody says, I can't sing high notes, they're absolutely right. If they say instead, I'm struggling to figure out how to keep my energy high enough to sing high notes without tensing up, now that we can deal with. So in that way, it's all about taking the right view. It's all about seeing things as they truly are so that you can actually make a correction. You can actually make some positive headway on something. But so long as you tell yourself, I have an intonation problem, you're correct. So long as you tell yourself, I can't sing high, you're right. So really trying to be very serious about reframing things so that they are not a dead end, so that they are workable, so that you can find the action steps to go forward with each of those issues. Because all God's children's got issues. Every single singer I know, from beginners to seasoned professionals, we all constantly have something we're working on. An upcoming podcast episode is going to be all about the idea of practice in singing. We're all part of a practice, and I mean that as a noun, not a verb in this case. So taking a right view to your strengths and to your weaknesses or challenges is really crucial. This is true for teachers too, of course. This is not only for singers, but this is true for voice teachers as well. So every voice teacher, I would challenge you to think, what are the things that I do really, really well? And what are the things on the flip side that I really need to work on? And try to really make some sort of, get 1% better at each of those things that are challenges for you every day. At least don't get worse. Okay, the next area that I wanted to talk about, taking a right view and seeing things as they really are in singing, is the term, and I'll put this in air quotes, competition. I've always been troubled by that idea, and I'm often troubled when I hear young singers talk about the business and about competition. Perhaps it's because of my background singing a lot of chamber music and singing in a lot of professional choirs, but it's not my go-to default setting to think of my colleagues as competition. And when students or other singers I hear describe our colleagues as that, it's always very jarring to me. Some of my best friends are people who could do the same gigs I'm doing, which the world at large might call my competition. But I don't think of them as my competition at all. I think of them as my colleagues, and in many cases, my friends. So I think, young singers, do yourself a favor. You're not the only person who can do any given gig. There's always going to be somebody else. And that's not necessarily good news, but please don't frame it as bad news for yourself, because that's a very toxic way to traverse life in general and the music world specifically. There's always going to be someone else who can do it. There's always going to be somebody else who could fill that role or sing that solo or get that spot or get that assistantship or whatever the case may be. There's always going to be somebody else. And that's not automatically a bad thing. While we're on this subject, I think there's a lot of room for improvement in the way that we handle rejection in the professional singing world. For years and years and years. And I recoiled at this when I was a student doing yaps myself, and I now recoil at it as a professor. It drives me bonkers when people call a rejection letter a PFO letter. No one is telling you to F off. If you don't know what that is, that's what it stands for. Please F off. No one is telling you to F off. What are they telling you? Not right now. Not this year. Try again later. Perhaps, at the worst, they're saying your skill set is not a good fit for this company. And maybe that's just now, maybe that's ever. I've had plenty of rejection letters, and a lot of them guided me. You know, one of the reasons I wound up in the early music and professional chamber choir realm, I do a lot of oratorio singing, I do a lot of recitaling. One of the reasons is because my track record, my percentages in the opera world were not very good. And lo and behold, that's not really my voice. That's not really my intellect. That's not really my interest. It doesn't mesh with the teaching career that I value. So my history and trajectory of rejection led me to my success. And I think that will happen if you allow it to. If you take the right view, if you see things as they really are, then rejection is a guide. That doesn't mean it's fun. That doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. Take those feelings seriously. Feel the pain of the rejection. I'm not suggesting that we mask pain. That would be very un-Buddhist of me, in fact. I'm suggesting that you see beyond the immediate sting of the no. I get it. The PFO thing is a way to sort of make a joke out of rejection, which is unpleasant. I get it. But can we grow beyond that? Because I think that's a limited view of what's actually happening, and it's not terribly helpful. It's more destructive than constructive, and I think we can do better than that as a term. Another big place where I think it's really valuable to see things as they are, and the larger framework of classical singing doesn't provide a lot of this for us. But there's a way. If you've talked to me in the last couple years, I've probably cornered you and given you a spiel about the Royal Conservatory of Music, commonly known as RCM. RCM is a Canadian outfit, been around for more than 100 years, and one of the ways that they come to us in the popular culture is by providing a framework of musical testing, musical skill development, and achievement. And they have tons of different instruments represented, but for our purposes, we're talking about voice. There's a 12 level from preparatory on up to a certificate that breaks down repertoire, exercises, oral theory, skill development, all sorts of different things into those different levels. I always think of them as belts in a karate class. And I have started incorporating this into my teaching framework because I think one of the most important things it does is to help students see things as they are. For instance, not all freshman voice majors come in at the exact same skill level. Not all juniors wind up at the same skill level. Not all master's degree students come in at the same level. Everybody comes in with what I call Swiss cheese technique. And I mean that they have certain things that are very, very strong, and then they have holes, sometimes inexplicable holes, in their skill set. Something like RCM helps to say, listen, person A and person B, you're both freshmen, you're both performance majors, but person A plays 7 different instruments and has taken music theory AP and all this sort of things, and they're a level 8 or a 9, and person B just learned to read music last year because they were only in choir and discovered they had a voice their senior year, so they're a level 6 or 7. That sort of information, I think, can be transformational, especially if we again take the right view. If person B looks at person A and says not, oh, well, we're both freshmen, but she is so far ahead of me, what the heck, I am terrible, I should change my major. But instead, if they look and say, okay, she's a 9 and I'm a 7, how can I get to 9? Then that gives them something to really, gives them a tangible framework to play catch up and to enhance their skills and grow and move and seek. If it's the sort of framework that I came up in, you just have this creeping suspicion that that other person across the room is much, much better than you, and you don't really have a concrete path for how to get better. You're kind of left to your own devices to figure out the ways in which you're struggling compared to them. Again, if we see things as they really are, if we take a right view, we can fix the problem and we can see what some of the steps would be to conquer some of the divide between two different singers. The final area that I want to talk about where taking a right view is incredibly important is performance anxiety. And I want to preface this by saying there are people with clinical levels of performance anxiety and other kinds of anxiety that require much more than just a mindset shift. So that's not what I'm talking about here. But for people that don't have a real pathology inside performance anxiety, I hope these are some words of information that will help you. There are 2 different kinds of stress. And I think it's important to understand that when you're thinking about that feeling you get before a performance. The negative connotation of stress is what we call distress. And that's what, when most of us think of stress, we think of distress. But I think that's missing a big piece of the puzzle. There's something called eustress, spelled E-U-S-T-R-E-S-S. Eustress. And that is the positive part of stress. I did a performance many years ago now in which, and this only has happened, thank goodness, it's only happened one time in my performing career, where I was standing backstage with nothing. No bubbles, no butterflies, no tingles, no nerves at all. I mean, I felt like I was about to go, mow the lawn or something. I just had no feeling of anticipation or excitement. And it was the worst performance I can remember. It was so hard. to get myself up because I had no eustress. I also had no distress. I had no stress at all. But it was really, really difficult to make it through that performance. It also happened to be a very difficult piece to sing. And it was like pushing a boulder uphill because I had no juice, no bubbles. So what I always try to do when I'm backstage is sense, and most of the time when I pay attention to what I'm feeling, I notice these are positive feelings. If I were to label the feelings that I'm feeling backstage before a performance, they would be something like, I am nervous, yes, but I'm nervous because I hope this goes well. I've put a lot of time into this. I put a lot of practice and thought into this program. I'm excited about certain people that are in the audience hearing it. I'm excited about the piece we're doing. I'm excited about the people I'm singing with. All of these things are examples of eustress. And I would say the vast majority of my performance anxiety, if I had to divide it into some sort of pie chart between eustress and distress, I would say 90% of it is eustress. There's always occasionally a little voice that says, well, the critic is here tonight and I hope they don't say anything mean, right? So it's totally natural. It's not reasonable to think that there will be zero distress. But I think if we'll pay attention, next time you perform, which God only knows when that will be. I'm recording this in the middle of the COVID quarantine. But the next time we all perform, take a second and feel the eustress. And notice that the majority of the feeling is probably eustress, not distress. The other thing that I think is really valuable, and I talk to my students about this all the time in studio class, I anticipate that the next time I perform, I will be nervous. Hell, I was nervous when I pressed record on this podcast. It would be unreasonable of me to expect that not to happen. So when we enter a performance experience or an experience that we know is going to carry with it some nerves, we should expect that to happen. And just to be silly and somewhat memorable, I always call it Uncle Bob, right? You know, everybody's got an Uncle Bob, right? Or something like it. Maybe his name's different. Or maybe it's an aunt, who knows? But everybody's got some relation. You know they're going to be there at Thanksgiving dinner, but still, when the door cracks open and it's Uncle Bob, you go, oh, God, okay. Hi, Uncle Bob, right? That's what performance anxiety is, right? We know it's going to show up, and we can diffuse its power by simply greeting it at the door and saying, Uncle Bob, I figured you'd be here, right? And we can make a joke out of it and again, diffuse some of the power of that distress by knowing darn well it was going to show up. In the academic setting, that's something a student can do week after week after week in studio class, in even their lessons. There are some students who are a nervous wreck before they come into their lessons. I try my hardest not to exacerbate that, but it's just the way some people are wired, right? So we can get really, really good with multiple performance experiences. We can get really, really good at sensing it and recognizing it and, as I say, greeting it. Give yours a funny name. Felicia. Hey, Felicia, right? Greet it at the door and know that it's coming. It's only if we delude ourselves into thinking, well, my next performance I won't be nervous for. It's only when we delude ourselves in that sort of way that we create a scenario in which those nerves showing up are somehow a disappointment or a letdown. The other thing, if you're a young singer listening to this, do not think that professional, seasoned singers don't get stressed and don't get nervous. They absolutely do. So it is not something that's going anywhere. So we'd be best served to learn how to deal with it. If we can look at our stress, our performance anxiety, and divide it into eustress and distress, and learn to greet the part of it that's not so negative. The part of it that's negative. If we can learn to greet the part that's negative at the door as something we'd expect to happen, then we rob it of its power. And we harness the value, the sort of bubbles of the eustress, That's what I always feel. I feel like standing backstage, I'm tingling and I'm ready and I'm on, not on edge, but I'm energized and I'm able to find the flow. That's what we want. I've got to have some eustress to get there. Well, that's it for today. I really appreciate you listening. If you know a voice teacher or you're a singer that would value this podcast, I hope you'll share it with them. If you're watching on YouTube, I hope you'll give a like and subscribe. If you're listening on a podcast provider like iTunes, I hope you'll give us a rating and subscribe to the podcast. And again, I hope you'll share it with your friends who are interested in singing and your friends who are voice teachers. Until next time, I'm Kyle Ferrill for The Balanced Singer.